Land is the first step to us building a physical campus here in Apple Valley, and we believe that having a permanent ministry space here in Apple Valley is going to help us reach our town in exciting new ways. We are trusting God to lead us. We're trusting Him to provide.
Did you know that every year over 10,000 people come through this building for graduations and teacher in-service days and community funerals? And we're able to provide that luxury to our town because of the faithful giving of our people. And it's our plan and our hope that this year we're able to pay off Powell Auditorium so that we can keep our hometown advantage right here in Victorville.
This plot of land is being used for ministry already. Every Tuesday we come out here and pray for the area. Adding infrastructure will help us reach our area in a much more impactful way.
God has been so good to us here at the Hesperia campus by blessing us with such an awesome building. But things have been a little tight lately. By adding more classroom space, not only do we get our kitchen back, but we get more space where we can teach kids, students, and adults alike how to reach their oikos more effectively right here in this community.
Amen. Amen to that. Thanks, gentlemen, for weighing in, helping us see the mission these days and what it's all about. How you doing, Victorville and Apple Valley and Hesperia and Phelan, cheering on the other sides of the desert? What a blessing. Bring y'all in the house for a little bit today. Once again, raise your hand if you need a copy of the outline, and we will provide it for you. We got our plants on every site today, watching out for you and trying to help your experience here at High Desert Church be as helpful as it possibly can be. Well, we are establishing a hometown advantage. We've been in this game for quite a while. These last couple of weeks, though, we're focusing our attention on some goals, some financial goals. We've got a campaign that we're launching, last till the end of August, but we're trying to do a couple of things. We've got 4 sites, for those of you who do not know. Presently, our Apple Valley folk over there meeting at a school over in Sitting Bull School over in Apple Valley, and we are looking to purchase them a piece of property, 13 plus acres for a permanent location on Yuckaloma Road, and they're excited about that. I don't know if they could possibly be as excited as I am, but we're hoping that that'll come to pass. Also, we want to position portable buildings on the 14 acres we already own for our Phelan site. They too are meeting at a school, Quail Valley Middle School. They'll actually continue to meet there on the weekends, even with those portables on their property, which is just a few blocks away from Quail Valley Middle School. But those buildings will be enormously helpful as they establish a more firmer footprint in the Phelan community. We're going to add classroom space at our Hesperia site. You heard Pastor Jason say it's getting a little tight over there. That's an understatement, and so we're excited to do that for them. And then to pay off this auditorium where we generate our services from each weekend, Powell Auditorium. We've been blessed to meet in this building for the last 18 years or so, and we're going to pay off that note. Just a little bit left, but part of this campaign is to allow us to get finished with the payments on this building. We are one church, you guys. We have 4 sites, but we're one church. This is not 4 campaigns for 4 different groups of people to pursue. This is one church, and we're all pulling together in order to allow each one of our 4 sites to benefit from our generosity. Cheryl and I are also chipping in on this and trying to make a significant contribution that would help make a difference on these 4 locations, these 4 sites. So we have a card we're hoping to get back from you. Some of you have already returned that card to us. Many more of you have not. We want you to check some boxes, obviously. Our focus is that you would give financially to help provide for these 4 projects. We're not looking for huge donations from everyone. We're a pretty average church in terms of our socioeconomic placement in the strata of large churches. Actually, we find ourselves on the lower end of that. It's hard to find a church our size with a budget as small as our annual budget happens to be, and it is hard at times to generate resources for capital investments simply because it's just not one of those wealthy communities where God has placed us to minister. So this takes all of us pulling together to give. And then we want you to pray for where you live, the community where God has placed you, both in terms of where you live with your immediate family as well as worship. We want you to deepen your commitment to Jesus. I hope that's your desire. I hope that everybody could check at least that box, and then to invite your oikos to HDC. Those people God has platformed you right in front of their lives, 8 to 15 people, supernaturally and strategically placed on the front burner of your life. The Greeks, out of the New Testament, the Greeks called that group of people an oikos, and that's our mission, to prepare you to more effectively reach those 8 to 15 people in your life. And then to share your story. Maybe you've got a hometown advantage story. Maybe it's because that HDC has been in your particular community, that God has done something really cool, either in your life or in the life of a family member, an oikos member. And so if you've got a story, check that box. We'll follow up with you and see if we can capture that story. Your story might be an encouragement to many others as well. So that's the response. And the campaign, again, will last through the end of August. We hope that the combined amount of our gifts will total $1.5 million. All right, now, during these 3 weeks, we're also reflecting on a story out of the Old Testament, story that you've all heard 100 times at least, and one that we're trying to give you some angles with that might broaden your understanding of the text. But it's the story of David and Goliath. And we talked initially a couple of weekends ago about what it means to accept a challenge, and then last time we looked at what it means to fight the battle. Can't accept a challenge, you guys, without understanding there are going to be battles in your future. Every initiative in our lives has a tremendous upside. Every time God calls us to something, there's great joy awaiting us. Some things in life are pretty cool because the upside's huge, but then with every initiative comes the battles, comes the difficult side. So what did you expect when you said you were willing to accept the challenge to get married? You didn't expect battles? Seriously? And I'm not just talking about battles with your spouse, I'm talking about battles with yourself. What did you expect when you accepted the challenge to become a father? You didn't expect battles? There's plenty of them. But that's what comes with a challenge. For us, leading a church is awesome. It's great joy. Cheryl and I to be in leadership here for the last 34 years, but I have to tell you it's also a battle, not with you. It's not that we fight with you. We fight with ourselves and the call that God has given us. I want to quit my job every Saturday night around 7:15 p.m. Walking away from this stage after presenting the first run of the message of the weekend and asking myself as I'm walking behind that curtain, I actually put 20, 30 hours into preparing that message, and that's what those poor people got. But I will tell you this, in the 34 years I've been the pastor here, I have quit this job exactly 0 times. Because you people are worth my fighting back my own feelings of insecurity and exhaustion. And today the message is about seizing the victory. And every time I get up here and look out at your smiling faces, maybe not today, but most weekends, your smiling faces, in my spirit I can seize a little victory because of what God is accomplishing in your lives. After 38 years of fighting a battle as a husband, not just with Cheryl, although we've mixed it up a few times ourselves, with one another. The battle I fight most often is with myself, wanting to be a better guy, wanting to be a better husband. I seize the victory every time she whispers in my ear, "I love you, baby." I remember raising a son. Hardest thing in my life was to try to be an example for that boy. I remember walking away from his bedroom after loud conversations. The volume alone made them ungodly. But I seized the victory. Every time I say, "Hey bro, how was church?" He says the message was great and the kids loved their class. You accept the challenge, you fight the battles, you seize the victory. So keep fighting. But we have to review a little bit for those of you who are slow. I'm just kidding. This is not the remedial group. My goodness, this is the early group. You guys are the advanced group. At every site, you guys are advanced. Or still blurry-eyed, I don't know. But every time we do a story like this, a series like this, where the story kind of builds on itself, unfortunately, we do need to bring everybody up to speed. Not unfortunately, it's good for us to review, even if we've been here for a couple weekends in a row. But this is how the story has unfolded to this point. Saul and the Israelites, verse 2, 1 Samuel 17. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. They're arch enemies, militarily, socially, so different. Religiously, a complete opposite of what the nation of Israel stood for. A ruthless group, uncivilized, according to the definition that we might bring to that conversation. Philistines were a tough crowd. And they occupied one hill and the Israelites another hill, and the valley of Elah was in between them. Neither had the nerve to attack the other because neither was confident that they could win. And so finally the Philistines generated a strategy known as single combat. It's fairly common in the ancient world to avoid extensive bloodshed. One of the armies would send out a representative. The other army would send out their representative. They would fight to the death, and the winner would become the masters of the loser. The problem here is that while the Philistines sent their guy, a 9'9" infantryman named Goliath, the optics were so frightening that no Israelite soldier was willing to volunteer. And the truth of the matter is, the commander of their army could have told one of them to go, but he couldn't find one that he thought could actually win either. This went on for 40 days with Goliath, verse 8, standing and shouting at the ranks of Israel. Send down a soldier to fight me. Choose a man. You got a man up there? Just a bunch of boys. Why do you come out here and line up for battle? You don't want to fight. Bunch of sissies. Sissies is a Hebrew word. No, I'm just kidding. That was just like the Mercerized version of the text for a minute. Now the Israelites have been saying, do you see how this man keeps coming out? Like anybody hadn't seen that. But they just like to talk. He's coming out to defy us. Horrible person. God's people have always talked a big game. In fact, we've always talked a bigger game than we're willing to play. And that was true then. That was true for 40 days in that valley. So here comes young David bringing supplies to his older three brothers who actually were deployed with the Jewish army. And he heard Goliath taunting God. And he had had enough of it. After one day, he had had enough. Unconscionable to him that anybody, I don't care how tall you are, anybody would be allowed to just stand up there and continue day after day to defame the God of Israel. Shame on us that we would stand idly by while that happens. And finally, he'd had enough, and you know what he said? Put me in, coach. Coach wasn't too sure. Certainly, you can understand that. But he ended up putting him in. By the way, main reason this campaign is such a great campaign isn't because we're just going to raise a bunch of money. It's because for some of you, it's going to be an on-ramp to spiritual maturity. An on-ramp to a lifestyle of faith and generosity. And even though many will give less than they should and less than they could, many of you will still give. And for the first time in your life, you're going to find out something about God. He actually works in the financial arena like he works in every other arena. Money doesn't throw him for a loop. Money doesn't caused him to take a step back and say, well, I can meet all of your needs, but I wasn't expecting to have to meet your financial needs too. God doesn't need our help. God doesn't need our money. Not my God, anyway. If you've come into church throughout your life and you see guys like me stand on a stage like this, talking about things of this nature like, we want you to give, and you're sitting there thinking, oh, he wants me to help. Listen, bro, if I needed somebody's help, I wouldn't be asking you. I'd be asking somebody who had a lot more money than you. Is that okay to say that? Just putting it out there. You always complain about how broke you are. Well, how can you help me? This isn't about helping God. It's not about helping Tom. It's not about helping nobody. This is about you taking an on-ramp to spiritual growth. This is for you. You're not going to help me. I'm going to help you today. I'm going to help you figure this out. David had historically been perceived as the underdog in this story. You walked into these auditoriums probably a couple of weekends ago thinking, yes, little David had been against big Goliath, man. What a miraculous story, how God used the little dude to beat the big dude. But then we've discovered, haven't we, together, David had no disadvantage. David had an advantage in that battle. He was well prepared. We told you that last time. The king says, David, you can't fight him. He's a well-trained, seasoned warrior who happens to be 9'9". And David says, yeah, but I'm a shepherd boy. Okay, I'm trying to get my head around that comparison. Then David reminds the king, you know what I do for a living? I don't just sit there and watch a sheep. I kill lions and bears for a living. I grab lions by their mane and I slit their throats when I discover they got one of my sheep in their mouth. I've killed bears with my bare hands, not from a distance. You know, not with my gun. And I will kill this Philistine the same way. You don't have to worry about that, king. See, God had prepared David, even as a shepherd, for that day. It's amazing that every season of life can prepare us better for the next season of life. And since we never know what the next season of life holds for us, you don't even know what tomorrow holds. You got your plans, you got your schedule, got it all worked out, right? You have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. I will tell you this. God is preparing you right now for what's going to happen tomorrow. You don't even know it. Well, David was killing bears and lions because they were like messing with his sheep. God was preparing that boy for this moment. Right now, we have 73 families in our church, and this, I think, is so great. Props to you, 73. You'll find out who you are in a minute. They're attending our Financial Peace University course right now. How many of you have gone through, on all of our sites, raise your hand if you've gone through FPU, Financial Peace University. It's a great course. And those of you who are experiencing crippling debt in your life, you need to go through that course. Next time it's offered, so keep your eyes peeled for when you get a chance to take that class. Right now, that combined group of 73 families across all four of our sites have a non-mortgage debt total of $4.4 million. And you know what they're learning how to do? Get rid of that debt. So I just want to say to you 73 families, props to you, because you know what you're doing? You're preparing for a great future life. Whatever it is, you go ahead and clap, man. Whatever it is God has for you. And I got no idea. I have no idea what God's going to do in your life in the future. But right now, you have taken initiative. Okay. You're in the class, right? And you're learning. You're preparing for something great in your future. Good for you guys. But he not only was prepared, he also used tactics you wouldn't expect. Saul tried to give him a quick makeover, make an infantryman out of a slinger. That wasn't going to work. David fastened on his sword over his tunic, walked around, probably tripping all over the king's tent, making an idiot out of himself. I actually think when Saul's speaking to him in verse 39, Saul was laughing out loud. You're right, you can't go out there like that because you look stupid. And so he took those armaments and those weapons off of David. They would have worked fine had David been an infantryman, but you can't be something you're not. And that was not who David was. He took his staff in his hand. He chose 5 smooth stones from the stream. He put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, he went into that valley to approach the Philistine. And he knew he had a strategic advantage. He knew it. He didn't need a miracle that day. David was not expecting a miracle. We look at that story as if it was miraculous. Right now, if you think that's miraculous, you are the only person at High Desert Church that still thinks that was a miracle. David didn't need a miracle. He just needed to do what God had prepared him to do, to be who he was in the power of God and to leverage the advantage that God had already given him. And that's why we said last time, this campaign does not require a miracle because there is $1.5 million of discretionary money. There's probably 10 times that sitting in High Desert Church right now. It's just a matter of what we're going to do with it. That's all. And if we raise 1.5, it will not be a miracle. It will be because some wonderful people decided to make some good choices. If every one of our family units, we told you this last time too, if you gave $70 a month for just 6 months, we'd exceed our goal. That's not a miracle amount. Now, most of you could and should give more than $70 a month, probably. Because we all play different positions. Some of you are leadoff hitters, some of you are cleanup hitters. You're big hitters. And because of your financial position, this whole campaign would require more from you. But we're all on the roster. Every one of us is on this roster for a reason, and we're all expected to contribute to the win that we're going to experience, the victory that we're going to seize. I began high school at 12. Not 12 o'clock, but 12 years of age. I love basketball because my dad actually had college scholarships offered to him to play basketball. He was a basketball coach, college basketball coach, great player. I grew up loving the game. But at 12 years old, about 5 foot tall and about $105, there was no way I was going to play much basketball in my high school career, as you can imagine. But I went out for the team as a freshman anyway, and I made the team. But I knew that I was going to spend a lot of time on the bench. In fact, that year, my freshman year, I got in one game for one play. I at first thought the coach was feeling sorry for me, but then I realized that he was actually feeling sorry for my father, who came to every game. It was freshman basketball, on road trips, he might be the only guy in the stand 3 hours away from home. But he drove that every game to watch me sit on the bench. And so the coach kept looking up at my pops. Finally, one game, I remember we're in Hemet. You know where the city of Hemet is? Never forget, the Hemet Bulldogs. Freshman basketball. Mercer! Go in for Roberts. It's like, seriously, coach? You want me to play? And I took one shot in a basketball game that season. The only game shot I took that year, that afternoon. He ran a play just for me. So I cycled around, called it the wheel, cycled around, came off a double pick. Got the pass, squared up, shot the ball. Bounced off the top of the backboard. In fact, as fate would have it, I'm reliving this moment, you guys, like it happened 5 minutes ago. There was one door in that gymnasium that was open. In that corner of the gym, and the ball bounced on the top of the backboard, onto the floor, 3 bounces, out the door. It took them, man, tears welled up in my eyes. I know, I laugh about it now too, so Y'all don't have to feel, oh, I can't. Pastor Tom's crying. It took them about 5 minutes to retrieve the ball. So a bad moment turned into a bad 5 minutes. You know, when it comes to giving money strategically to the church, some of you have always considered yourselves to be bench players. And we provide a challenge, and you sit there and you say to yourself, no, I ride the pine when it comes to money. I'm not in the game. So what I'm doing today is calling your name. I want you to take the shot. And I don't know what that shot's going to look like. I will tell you this. I know at the end of the game, my dad, with the deepest sincerity you can imagine, looked me in the eye and said, good game. You took that shot. One of the strategic advantages in this campaign that we have as a church is that we don't have any deep pockets at High Desert Church, at least none that I'm aware of. I've often mused about how the High Desert could use a professional sports team, so we can talk a few of those guys into attending here and tithe and give us some deep pockets. But what do you think the chances of Major League Baseball putting a team in Victorville, NFL, New England Patriots and the Victorville people playing in the Super Bowl this year? It's just not going to happen, right? So you know what we're stuck with? We're stuck with people like you and me. We're stuck with average people. You say, well, why is that an advantage? I'll tell you why it's an advantage. If we had those deep pockets in our church, some of them would do what they probably should do before God, because to whom much is given, much is required. And they would probably write a big check. And maybe with 2 or 3 families, we would reach $1.5 million. And you, my friend, would have another excuse to ride the pine for another campaign. It is such a blessing that those guys don't attend here. Because now we're stuck with us. This ministry has always been fueled by the faithful contributions of people who make an average salary. You're average, just like me. And when a whole lot of ordinary comes together, you know what happens? Something extraordinary happens. So anyway, we're going to talk about Season of Victory. I know we've been reviewing a lot, so never mind. Okay. Season of Victory. 3 thoughts. Fill in some blanks. Secure it. Secure the victory. Secure it. There's no doubt. You guys, there's no doubt that for those soldiers standing on either ridgeline, this was as complete and even startling as a victory as any of them had ever witnessed personally. But victories are all short-lived if the enemy who fell gets up and returns to fight another day. And David was going to make sure that didn't happen. So he secured the victory. And you already know what he did. My question is, why did David even take 5 stones with him? I mean, here's a kid that knows he's going to take him out with 1 shot. Are you serious? Like right now? That's why he ran to Goliath. In close proximity, what does every military historian tell us? All of them. Same thing. A slinger, a trained slinger at close range is lethal. You wasn't going to miss. Some have suggested, well, he took 5 stones just in case he missed 4 times. Read the story, man. Read the history books and then tell me that. His confidence in his ability was high. His confidence in his sling was high. His confidence in his God was off the charts. He knew he'd take Goliath out with 1 shot. But there was no way to predict what the rest of the Philistine army was going to do. So you know what he did? He loaded his shepherd's pouch with as much ammunition as he could, because he was going to take out more Philistines. That's why he picked up 5 stones. If his bag had been big enough, he'd have picked up 6 or 50. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David runs quickly toward the battle line. Reaching into his bag, took out a stone, he slung it, struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone, watch this, sank into his forehead. You know what kind of velocity that requires? That was a good shot, kid. And the earth shook when Goliath fell. We call this dead weight, face plant in the valley of Elah. And David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. That's all he needed, not a miracle. That's all he needed. He had no sword in his hand. And he killed the Philistine. Eitan Hirsch is an Israeli ballistics expert. And he said that at a distance of 35 meters, the stone would have hit Goliath's head with a velocity of 34 meters per second. Goliath had less than a second to react. He had no time to react. Bam. In terms of stopping power, it would have been the equivalent, as I told you last weekend, one historian said, a .45 caliber handgun. And then further in the creek that runs through the valley of Elah, there's that creek bed where David picked up his stones. And I'm not making this up. This is too good. Many of the stones in that creek today are made of barium sulfate. It has a mass density of 4.2 grams per cubic centimeter, almost twice the density of a normal rock. If David would have loaded his pouch with 5 of those stones, that's a bazooka, bro. David ran and stood over him. He's already dead. He took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from the sheath. Now we're getting back to what he used to do with lions and bears. And he took him by the hair with one hand, and he cut off his head with the other. When the Philistines saw that he wasn't getting up, you know what they did? They ran. That wasn't the agreement, was it? The agreement was the losing army, if the representative died, the losing army becomes the servants of the winning army. That was never their intention. They ran. There's more of a spiritual lesson here than anything. Showing mercy to an enemy combatant might actually be the right thing to do in many circumstances. So that's not what I'm talking about when I say secure the victory. I'm talking about your spiritual enemies. With a spiritual enemy, do not take any prisoners. What did Jesus say? You remember what Jesus said? If your eye offends you, what do you do with it? You gouge it out. If your right hand offends you, what do you do with it? You cut it off. Now, cool your jets. I'm not saying, because I don't believe Jesus is supporting self-mutilation as a strategy for spiritual growth. I don't think you should gouge your eye out. I don't think you should cut your hand off. What I do think is you figure out how the enemy has harassed you and how the enemy has defeated you for so long, and figure out a way to kill that enemy. Because if you don't kill him, you'll fight him tomorrow again. And when it comes to this idea of generosity and being willing to not be so tight-fisted, but to open up your hands financially, it's all about just killing the enemy. The enemy keeps haunting you. Every time we talk about this, and we don't talk about it every weekend. Some of you may be new at one of these sites and thinking, oh, it's a money talk. It's not. We don't talk about it that often. But when we do talk about it, y'all are tired of feeling bad, right? Y'all are tired of feeling like, oh, yeah, if only I could. I wish I could. You know, shoulda, woulda, coulda. But, here are all the reasons why. And every time we bring it up, that enemy, that fear, that doubt keeps coming back and messing with you. This is what I want you to do. Kill it. A sling is simply a tool. It's a military tool. We call a military tool a weapon. Money is a tool. It's a military tool. It is a weapon that we fight spiritual battles with. It's a weapon that you as a believer in God, you can use that weapon to slay the giant in your life that harasses you every day about how God will not provide, about how you have to fear about provision. You're never going to have enough to do all those things that you need to do, want to do, should be doing. Are you tired of hearing that? Are you tired of him standing there mocking you because you never make enough? What kind of a loser are you? You know, when you're fed up, then kill it. This is a battle. This is a battle for you. You know you want to give because you love Jesus and you love his church. See? You know that. But you doubt you can afford it. See? Oh, what do I do? You know what the Bible says about God's faithfulness, right? But with your luck, you're going to be the exception, the lone exception to the rule, right? What do? You know you spend money on things that are far less important than this. But you really, really, really love those things, right? What do? You know what I call that? I call that a battle. All I'm saying is win the battle. This time around, just win it. A complete victory for you today would be to stop talking about something you know is important to do and actually follow through. Completely. Because your fear will come back every time you face a challenge like this until you finally face your fear. What if people told you your whole life? Face your fear. And then cut off its head. Now we're talking, obviously, about financial campaign. I know that. But this isn't just about developing ministry sites. Some of you are struggling with issues related to depression. Some of you struggle with anxiety. Some of you are overwhelmed with loneliness. You've been defeated with the reality of infertility. There's so many other things that could be haunting you today. And you're standing up there on your own ridgeline watching other people talk about healing, watching other people talk about seizing the victory and overcoming the emotional bondage that you're in. But you're not sure you want to be that vulnerable. And then High Desert Church comes along and offers you the opportunity to rush that giant in your life. And you're wondering if you can do that. Your complete healing may require that you trust God with what he's provided for you through your own church. See, this can be the hope you've needed. I don't know. This could be the hope you've needed from the God that you believe in through the church that you already go to. But you got to get in the game. See, it's never how good a player is that makes a difference. It's how well they play. On paper, this is a piece of cake. I look at the metrics on paper and I say this is an absolute piece of cake. In reality, though, this is about how many of you are going to win the battle with the person you look at in the mirror every morning. Secure that victory. Number two, your team wins when you win. David knew that going in. He said before the battle took place, this day the Lord will deliver you into my hands. I'll strike you down, cut off your head. You know that. This very day I'll give the carcasses, the whole Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals. And the whole world will know there's a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know it is not sword or spear that's going to win this battle. It's the Lord who will fight this battle. It's his battle. And he will give you Philistines into our hands. Our hands, not my hands. Our hands. He made it clear from the beginning he wasn't playing for himself. And then after the battle, the men of Israel and Judah surged forward after Goliath is dead, right? Surged forward with a shout. Man, that is the first noise we have heard from those boys in 40 days. Surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath, the gates of Ekron. Their dead were strewn along the Shaaraim road to Gath and Ekron. I mean, look at those guys. Just a few minutes earlier, they were in fear. They were in bondage to fear. They were incapable of making a move. And now look at them. Listen to them. They got their swag back. Look at verse 53. The Israelites returned from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their camp. And David took the Philistines' head and brought it to Jerusalem, put the Philistines' weapon in his own tent. Verse 55, as Saul watched David going out to meet the Philistine, he says to Abner, commander of the army, "Hey, Ab, now I know David, but who's his father? I mean, what's his father's name? His father's got to be so proud. We have to reward his father, because what I'm looking at right now, that's good parenting right there." And Abner says, "As surely as you live, your majesty," in other words, I promise, I have no idea who his dad is. But you better believe they were going to find out. Why? Because when you win, the team wins. See, number 3 and last, your victory changes more than a circumstance. Changes more than a circumstance. Let me just kind of take a little trip on a parallel track for a moment. In a few months, one of our teams will again be traveling to the Eastern African country of Malawi. We've got a relationship with the Malawians and have for decades. And over the years, we have built churches. We've installed freshwater wells for a number of communities. And when I say we, I mean we. It's your gifts, our gifts, that have made that happen. And it's probably technically a few months, but it's less than a couple of months. Another team from here is going to go help build a church for a Malawian pastor. Now, this pastor has actually gone through our oikos training. It's pretty cool. He's not just a random pastor out there in Eastern Africa somewhere. We know this guy. We have trained this guy. This guy's one of our guys. He operates 11 regional prayer chapels. And now he's going to have a permanent facility to prepare people to change their worlds for Christ. And they're going to hear the same verbiage that you hear about those 8 to 15 people God has supernaturally and strategically placed on the front burner of those people's lives. And you know where a full 50% of the funds to build that church came from? You. You see, you gave that money that day, and that was transformational for you because you knew it was the right thing to do. But your victory changed more than a circumstance. Those gifts given on that day will change the spiritual trajectory of thousands of Malawian lives for generations to come. King said in verse 56, find out whose son this young man is. As soon as David returned from killing the Philistine, Abner took him, brought him before Saul with David still holding the Philistine's head. I know that sounds so gross. I mean, what do you do with it? This is the point I'm making. Victory or defeat, regardless of how a battle that you choose to fight, you choose not to fight, you engage, you win or lose. Every battle always frames what the next battle will look like. So right now you're in a battle. And whether you win it or lose it will determine what your next battle will look like. A good decision today always creates better tomorrows. That's why I say don't just accept the challenge, fight the battle. Seize the victory because you're not done fighting. But the next battle will look different if you win this one. David's victory wasn't in the valley over Goliath. You know where David's victory was? It was on the ridgeline with David. He decided to fight, not to crow about how horrible Goliath was, but to fight Goliath. And you know what that was? That was a good decision, David, because look how it transformed your tomorrows. Let me just walk you through a sequence here. David would become the most popular leader in Israel. David would become the second king of Israel. David would become the most successful military commander in Israel's history. David would be described throughout history as a man after God's own heart. What a great description. that literature would record for thousands of years about you. The Messiah, Jesus, would be commonly referred to as the son of David, the offspring of David, the root of David, a descendant of David. Bethlehem, you know what that town's called? The town of David. Jerusalem, you heard of that city? Oh yeah, it's the city of David. You see what David's tomorrows were like? Because he made a quality decision that day. It takes one big play to change the momentum in a game. A fumble near the goal line can swing momentum in favor of a team that recovers the football. A block punt can be enough to give a team the kind of boost it needs to suddenly get them back in the game, a game that looked like a lost cause exactly one play ago. A missed pass can take the wind out of a team's sail. You remember this missed pass? Yeah, so do I. You know what Tom Brady said in the post-game presser? He said, I've caught that in practice every time. Well, this ain't practice. This is the Super Bowl. Thing is, when you study that whole idea of one play changing the momentum of a game, and some of you who are sports fans, you may already know this, but there's research done. I mean, these guys have broken down all of the metrics, and this is a fact. It's not just that the play took place, it's when the play takes place in the flow of the game that makes the biggest difference. David just killed one soldier that day that we have a record of. I have a feeling he probably emptied his pouch eventually. But it wasn't that he made the play. It's when he made the play. He made his play that day. Can I just say that today might be your big play day? Lord, when are you gonna reveal yourself to me at a level that I've never known you before? Let me tell you when. Today he will. Today is when the momentum will shift in many of your lives. Before I let you go, I'm running out of time. I already know that, so you don't have to remind me. A little epilogue to this story that I want to just leave you with. It's important to realize that all didn't come up roses for David and his family. You know, we list a lot of wonderful things that took place in his life, but you already know that many of the stories that are famous about David, that he failed often, his family struggled often. But one story is important, I think, for us today as we close this Hometown Advantage series and officially launch this campaign. God told Nathan the prophet to tell David something. Now, Nathan and David, Nathan's the prophet, David's the king. They had a great relationship, albeit a tense one at times, because it was the role of the prophet to speak into the king's life. And there were times that the king, any king, would go to a prophet of God and ask him questions. And then there were times that God would unilaterally tell the prophet, I want you to go in and tell the king this because he'll never ask himself. And so here in chapter 17 of 1 Chronicles, verse 7, God tells Nathan the prophet, tell my servant David, this is what the Lord says. David, I took you from the pasture because he was a what? He was a shepherd. From tending the flock and appointed you ruler over my people of Israel. You're king now. I've been with you wherever you've gone. I've cut off all your enemies from before you. Greatest military commander in Jewish history. Now I'm going to make your name like the names of the greatest men on earth. When they talk, David, about how great all these people are, your name is going to be in that sentence. And I'll provide a place for my people Israel, plant them so they can have a home of their own, no longer be disturbed. Wicked people won't oppress them anymore as they did at the beginning. In fact, they've done ever since the time I appointed leaders over my people Israel. I'm going to subdue your enemies. I declare to you that the Lord will build a house for you. David, you're going to have a palace. The king's going to have a cool house too. When your days are over and you go to be with your ancestors, I'm going to raise up your offspring to succeed you. We all know the successor, Solomon. One of your own sons. And I will establish his kingdom too. And all the time, David is just like soaking it in. Oh yeah, this all sounds so good. But David, he's the one who will build a house for me, not you. You know what that was for David? That was new information. because it had always been David's longing to build a temple for God. But he wasn't going to get to do that. Must have been a deep disappointment to him. But even though he wouldn't personally benefit from the temple because he's never going to walk through the doors of that temple, David still wanted to be a part of what God was going to do through that building and for the lives of countless Jewish people for centuries to come. So 12 chapters later, this is what we read that David did. He says in verse 3, chapter 29, besides, in my devotion to the temple of my God, I now give my personal treasures. I'm not spending government money here, he says. I'm writing a check out of David's bank account. For what? To build that temple. You know what? That's going to be our story, I think. Because you might never come to Victorville, actually, because you're attending a site on the other side of the valley. You might worship here in Victorville and never attend a campus like the one we're developing in Phelan or the one we're developing in Hesperia. You might be worshiping in Apple Valley today. And for whatever reason, you may never darken the doors of Powell Auditorium again. Big whoop. Because we are going to take out of our own personal treasures, not so that we personally can benefit from something, but so that God can use it in the lives of others, whoever they might be, to elevate his great name throughout the Victor Valley and beyond. I know that some of you may need even more time to prayerfully consider what amount God would provide this campaign through you, and that's totally fine. But I want us all to get in the game because we're calling your number, folks. Now, next week we begin a study of the book of Colossians. So we're done with David. We're done with David. But the book of Colossians, one of the greatest letters in the New Testament, we'll be looking at it in some detail. So we hope you come back and join us next week. But I want to hand it over to your lead pastor at every site, and he'll come and close the service.